Larry E. Morris is a writer and editor with the Neal A. Maxwell Institute of Religious Scholarship at Brigham Young University. He is the co-editor, along with John Welch, of Oliver Cowdery, Scribe, Elder, Witness, published in 2006 by the Maxwell Institute. He has also published articles on Oliver Cowdery in BYU Studies, the Farms Review, and the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies. Morris is also interested in the history of the American West and published The Fate of the Corps, What Became of the Lewis and Clark Explorers after the expedition in 2004 with Yale University Press. He recently completed a book on explorer John Coulter for the University of Nebraska Press. He and his wife Deborah live in Salt Lake City and have 4 children. The following books written by Larry Morris are available at the Fair Conference Bookstore: Oliver Cowdery, Scribe, Elder, Witness. That's the one, so it's available. So with that, we'll turn the time over to Larry Morris.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to speak at the Fair Conference. And I'd like to talk a little bit about a person that I have a great deal of affection for, and that's Oliver Cowdery. I'd like to discuss some of the controversies surrounding Oliver Cowdery. The first one that comes up is something that happened before Oliver was even born. It's known as the wood scrape, and this happened in Middleton, Vermont in 1802. It was a group of people who broke away from the Congregational Church, started their own group, started using divining rods to prophesy, to search for treasure, to search for lost articles. And the main participants were the Wood family of Middleton, Vermont, and a man by the name of Justice Winchell. They predicted that there would be an earthquake in January of 1802, and there was quite a bit of hubbub about this in the community, quite a bit of alarm. The local militia was called out, and when the earthquake did not take place, the group was disgraced, and Winchell was warned out of the community, and the Wood family, who had been prominent prior to that, left and went to New York. And a 19th century historian by the name of Barnes Frisbee wrote about this wood scrape, and he believed it was the origin of Mormonism. Now, the Cowdery family lived at that time in Wells, Vermont, which is the neighboring township next to Middleton. And Frisbee got a report that this Winchell had stayed at the Cowdery home before the wood scrape. And he writes, "I have been told that Joe Smith's father resided in Pulteney," that's another neighboring community, "at the time of the wood movement, and that he was in it and one of the leading rodsmen. Of this I cannot speak positively for the want of satisfactory evidence." Well, at least he admits it. But that he was a rodsman under the tuition of this counterfeiter, that's Winchell, after he went to Palmyra, has been proven to my satisfaction. I have said before that Oliver Cowdery's father was in the wood scrape. He really didn't say that. He just said that Winchell stayed at the Cowdery home. Cowdery lived in Wells, afterwards in Middleton, and then went to Palmyra. And there we find these men with the counterfeiter Winchell searching for money over the hills and mountains with the hazel rod, and their sons Joe and Oliver, as soon as they were old enough, were in the same business and continued in it until they brought out the vilest scheme that ever cursed the country, Mormonism. So the attempt is to link Joseph Smith Sr. with William Cowdery, Oliver Cowdery's father, in some kind of a movement that later produced the church. It's really based on hearsay evidence, as you can tell. Of course, this was the trend with 19th century historians generally. But the Smiths at that time were in eastern Vermont. And Lucy Mack Smith documents their history pretty well. And she never mentions them going over to western Vermont, over to the Middleton area. Michael Quinn speculated that they went over there just briefly, and Joseph Smith Sr. got involved in the wood scrape, and then they went back to eastern Vermont. There is a Joseph Smith listed in the 1800 census for Pulteney, Vermont, but I found that there was also a Joseph Smith in all the tax records throughout the 1790s. So I think there's good evidence that Joseph Smith was a longtime resident of the area. And we really don't have any evidence that the Smith family moved over there. Also, the Woods and Winchell left the town in disgrace, and William Cowdery, who lived in Wells at the time, he moved right into Middleton in 1809, and then went temporarily to New York, and when he came back, he moved again to Middleton. He married his second wife there after his first wife died in the Congregational Church in Middleton, and every bit of evidence we can find from, contemporary evidence from Middleton indicates that he was a respected citizen, and that probably wouldn't be true if he had been involved in the wood scrape. Another thing that frequently comes up is the Ethan Smith connection. Ethan Smith was author of View of the Hebrews. It was published in first edition in 1823, second edition in 1825, and he, at that time, was a minister in Pulteney, Vermont, where the Cowdery family was living at the time. Now, let me give you an example of speculation on Ethan Smith and Oliver Cowdery. Since Pastor Smith wrote his book to convince his fellow Americans of the religious importance of his ideas about the American Indians, we can speculate that he also used his pulpit to expound on them. In the congregation, Oliver Cowdery might thus have heard and been deeply impressed, and there was a reasonable period of time in which Oliver Cowdery could have supplied Joseph with a copy of View of the Hebrews. Though later Joseph claimed that he did not meet Oliver until the spring of 1829, he might have said that to preclude any appearance of collusion. It is also possible that some other individuals were involved in the collaboration and that Oliver worked with them first and not directly with Joseph until later. Again, this is just pure speculation. I think it comes up because in 1818, Oliver's stepmother had her three daughters baptized in the Congregational Church in Pulteney. And Ethan Smith was the minister of that church. But he didn't become minister until 1821. And when I searched the records in Pulteney, I couldn't find any mention of the Cowderys in the church records for the time that Ethan Smith was minister. So what it boils down to is we can't prove the negative. We can't prove that Oliver didn't know Ethan Smith or that he wasn't aware of View of the Hebrews or anything like that. But we can say that we don't have any evidence of an association between the two. And this idea of Oliver Cowdery getting involved in the origins, the early origins of Mormonism, long before he taught school in Manchester, it comes in another theory as well. There's a book called Who Really Wrote the Book of Mormon? The Spalding Enigma. The authors are Cowdery, Davis, and Vanek. And they speculate that Oliver went to New York in the early 1820s, around 1822, made contact with the Smith family, and eventually got Sidney Rigdon involved in using the Spalding manuscript to produce the Book of Mormon. And they have him over there based on some reports. After the Book of Mormon was published, there were a couple of newspapers in Ohio that said, we remember this Oliver Cowdery when he was a printer in Canada and Western New York about 7 or 8 years ago, and that was published, I think, in 1831. So they, based on that report,